Okay, thanks everyone. We'll kick off. Thank you everyone for coming along today. I'll start us off with the karakia. Whakatakatahau ki te uru, whakatakatahau ki te tonga, kia ma kina kina te uta, kia ma taratara ki tai, ihi ake ana ti atakura, hi tio, hi huka, hi hohu, ti he mori ora. Welcome everyone, thanks for coming along. Welcome to today's meeting. We've got a wee bit to get through, so we'll move along. Just want to acknowledge Molly and Mackenzie here today, both with equal rights to be at the table. I know that there was when we discussed it at council about you both being here, there was great excitement about your willingness to participate. So thank you very much for coming along, and everyone else, thank you for being here too. Appreciate this new time zone, which is our new time slot, may be challenging, but I ask you to keep on pushing to be here. So the next thing on there is the terms of reference. You'll notice that on the terms of reference there is the change has been reflected there of the two youth people there. Everything else is just there for our information. And then we move into the minutes of the apologies. I've jumped ahead, haven't I? Sam Broughton is an apology. So can I have a mover that we accept Sam as an apology? Thank you, Ken. Seconded. Thanks, Shane. All those for, against, carried. Any conflicts of interest in today's for today's meeting? Lovely. We'll move on to the minutes of the previous meeting. Is there anything in the minutes of that previous meeting that anyone would like to raise? And we'll take it as read. Someone move. Thanks, Lydia. Someone seconded. Thank you, Molly. Molly McKenzie. Molly's voting today. Well done for seconding that. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair. Apologies, Mr. Chair. I just had one question regarding the confirmation of the minutes. Just in the actions is the status table, which is blank, and how do we expect that to be followed up, given the nature of our meetings? What would that look like moving forward as we work through those particular things, I'm guessing? And just secondly, what was done with the documents that I had handed in at our last meeting?
Thanks, Shane. The issue, the Te Mata Waka conversation and the Māori Awards conversation is been scheduled for September, so that's all forming part of that conversation. In terms of the action, Tim.
Yeah, throw it to me. I'm just looking at the actions here. Should they have a status on them? I'm just probably thinking that they do need to be updated, and I think just a running status should be applied in the meetings. So for the first one there, yes, obviously that action needs to be changed. Meetings monthly at 10 o'clock needs to be changed to 4 o'clock, and status would be completed. The second one, Chief Executive and Councillor Glidden to brief the Selwyn Youth, that's completed. Third one, comms team to prepare proposals, the most effective ways to engage with communities. That is ongoing, and perhaps will be progressed further today.
Yes.
Contact with other councils as to their models and ways of engagement. That is ongoing and a subject of a report today. So just an update on the status there. Requesting Local Government Commission to present to the subcommittee best practices of past reviews and various models, including so on. Specific information is something for a future meeting. Murray? Is that correct?
There we go. We haven't actually discussed that in any more detail at this point, so I think that's something we just need to have a conversation about as to how we facilitate that.
Yeah, so that's to be completed. Status, Mr. Jarman and Mr. Jim Palmer to be invited to a future meeting. That's to be discussed as well. So still, that may not happen. Agreement on, or may happen. Agreement on timeline. I think we have got a broad agreement on the timeline. Even there's a report today that talks about changes in the timeframes brought about by amendment to the legislation.
Yes, there is the timeline has been amended, so we have got that timeline in there. I think there's agreement on that.
Style of engagement, that's yet to be decided, and we'll start talking about that today. Address identified issues raised by councillor.
That was the issue we just talked about the Māori wards.
And so that's ongoing and to be discussed further at a September meeting.
Yep.
And then the last one, report from Murray State in terms of the previous work, and that's subject to today's report.
No, that's been completed. That was
Completed.
reported at the last meeting.
So have we got a sort of a status update we can provide for that? I believe. Good.
Thanks, Shane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anything else, Shane?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Koe whakaere, Tim. And whilst as the raiser of that question, I didn't want to take away from the amount of actions that are on that table, because I feel that it is necessary to capture what's being put, and appreciate that table being in there, and the action taken to solve some of those questions. The question that I have regarding my initial question was that should my concerns, the documents that I've handed in, be considered for further discussion. The timeline in the terms of reference gives by 31st of August in the year before the election, year, if establishing Māori boards and constituencies. So my corridor has always been around the requirement of this council to follow through with legislation, and that refers back to the documents that I put. So maybe a conversation further. I didn't want to dwell on it too much, but given that there is a timeline there, and that the further discussion was to be held in September, I think there needs to be a little bit more urgency around it.
So I'm not. The timeline to me is the timeline that's in the terms of reference. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, on page 6. Table 1. And apologies, I probably should have put this up before when meeting, Mr. Chair. If due consideration.
Murray, sorry.
Yeah,
Mr. Chair. Murray, do you want to speak to that timeline? And I suppose by 31st of August in the year before election, if establishing Māori wards, initial proposals must be made.
Yeah, look, basically at this point in time, we're just working through the process. We don't have numbers, for example, at this point to even probably make any informed comment, but we certainly are within the timeframes that would be expected to be operating within. So council is following that statutory process.
So that 31st of August is 2020 next year.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So we have had we've moved from past the minutes. So we're now into the local government report. Tim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll pass to Murray State in a minute, but this is just bring the committee some information on legislation change, which is bringing the timeframes forward, I believe. So that's the date there, and that's second to last paragraph of note is the last date of making initial proposals now the 31st of July 2024 rather than the 31st of August 2024. And there's an appendix 1 to that for your information. Murray, do you want to have further comments?
Thank you. Just some brief comment there that basically what's occurring here is we've received updated information which will has not yet been passed into law, but is expected to be done in August. And on the basis of that, the Commission's just letting us know what that's likely to mean. And really what it's doing is just bringing forward a wee bit of the timeframes for council, not significantly, but just bringing it forward slightly, but also allowing more time for engagement, for people to comment and provide feedback to the council later on through the process. And that seems to be the main thread that I can see around that. There is some other work around the timeframes for Māori wards as well, and so there's some information coming through there. But I understand that may be relating to the not 2025, but the next session after that.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of work in progress through there. What that's also meant too is that the guidelines we worked to have now been updated to July. So we are working off the new guidelines, even though they have not been enacted at this point in time, but it is expected that this will be passed through by 31 August of this year.
So that losing the month, you don't see as being a big issue for our timeline?
I
It's not gonna
don't see
squash
that.
us up too much?
No, I don't see that. It's essentially end of July instead of end of August next year, and I don't see it as a problem.
Any other comments or questions around that report? Someone like to, the recommendation is that we receive the report. Someone to move the recommendation that we receive it. Thank you, Malcolm and Lydia. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you for that. The next one here is choosing an electoral system. This is the report's been given about, there's two recommendations here. One is to receive and the second one is to recommend. I'll open so as the author of this, is there anything you'd like to raise in this one here, Tim?
I'll take it as read, but just fundamentally, there is a recommendation to move from the FFS system to a single transferable vote system. In terms of process, I think it's important to understand that we can only make a recommendation on this issue to council, and it would need to go to council in the September meeting. If the council resolved to adopt the recommendation, thank you, sorry, I should know the better, shouldn't I? To accept the recommendation, then it's publicly gazetted or notified in a number of different publications and media channels. And then people have an ability to say whether they agree or disagree, or if they want to have a poll. And if there's, I think, a 5% threshold of electors is reached in terms of indicating they want to go poll, it then proceeds to a poll. So that's the process, and I'll let Murray speak to the details and intricacies of the systems themselves. Murray.
Thank you. There's certainly been, I suppose, a slow shift in local government from first past the post, moving a bit more towards STV. Each time there is an election, it seems there's a few more councils that do come on board with that process. It has its benefits, it has its disadvantages as well, which the report has laid out some of those. I suppose one of the key ones in there is that it works best with STV when there's a large pool of candidates, or if there's more than one seat being contested. At the moment, you have a ward structure that has 2 elected members as its minimum, and so it would work relatively well in that sort of environment. I'm aware that the Local Government Commission talks about 3 as being the minimum number, but the Future for Local Government just basically said more than 1 seat. So there was a little bit of difference through there as part of that process. Trying to think what else sort of add to that. I suppose it's one that the downsides to a change like this, if you did decide to go down that path, is simply it is relatively complex, and there may be the risk of people not understanding the process to the same degree. I think the first past the post is very simple, and therefore it has its benefits in that area. But we are seeing, like, the Future for Local Government is now recommending that we look at that, and that the council does consider that as an option. So there's probably not much more I can add to that, and just interested to see what everyone's thoughts and comments were.
Thanks, Murray. Malcolm.
Yeah, well, the maximum which I make decisions under is normally as to whom is the benefit and at what cost. There is a cost with this, and I'm not totally convinced that we need to change. Yes, there was an issue when we had the health board here with STV and we had first past the post, and as somebody who's seen many elections, I had many phone calls from people wondering who in the hell to vote for on the health board when they had a small paragraph in a booklet giving them the background. And yes, it would be beneficial if we had a large pool of candidates, but the history would be in Selwyn that we don't tend to have a large pool of candidates. I don't know how the electorate will handle this. So if you do decide, if we do decide as a committee to take this through to the council as a recommendation and it goes forward to a poll of the community, I'll be very interested to see what their feedback is. At the moment, the system we've got works efficiently. We get our results fast and it's reasonably cheap to administer. Yes, the Future for Local Government has talked about going to STV, And when you look at the number of councils around the country using it, it is very small. Even though there have been some come on board, it is not a great number of people. Whether the future for local government recommendations see the light of day is also another moot point. To my mind, the system we've got at the moment works quite well. If, however, we do decide to have councillors elected at large and not have a ward system, then perhaps STV, to my mind, might work quite well. But as we sit at the moment along the process, I myself am not entirely convinced that STV is the way to go forward.
Thanks for sharing that, Malcolm. Lydia.
Yeah, I guess my question is, why are we changing the electoral system, or why is the recommendation to change the electoral system? And the only real reason I see is to follow the Future for Local Government review. And what doesn't sit right with me is the fact that our central government hasn't told us what they would like to do with that, and the fact that it could just be put on the shelf and set to the side, and we're changing the way we do things for that review. So I'm unsure whether now is the right time, and I find it hard to change to single transferable vote when we don't know what our ward structure will look like. And I almost feel like that it's around the wrong way, and that you should determine your ward structure and your boundaries and how everything sits, and then you can look at how the vote works. Because as you say, if it's councillors at large, STV probably work quite well. But yeah, so I've got hesitations around that, and I just don't think we should be making changes that our community isn't aware of. And there's a lot of distaste with so much change happening in local government and central government with all of our reforms that we have. So I just wonder whether more change is setting more distaste in the community, which is hard, because then the other hand of it, change might spark them up a little bit and they might be more interested. Yeah. And I guess, like I was reading, it's their local electoral app provides for local authorities and their communities to choose. And I don't know if changing and going to a poll costs a lot of money, and I don't think we should be putting that onto our ratepayers at the moment. So I don't think we should change. My recommendation would be to...
Just to be clear, it doesn't automatically go to a poll. We publicly notify, and then if there's a 5% response saying that they'd like a poll, then there's a poll. I suspect that number may be difficult to meet, because 5% of all our electors is quite a high number. So it's quite likely, I think, that the outcome would be that the council would make a decision, they would notify it, and that would be the decision.
That's it.
There is a process that allows a poll to happen, but it's not automatic.
Mm.
And I guess that you're weighing up that decision there. If 5% of the population decided that they wanted to have a poll, then that would justify the expenditure as well. So, Shane.
Well, I was hoping that maybe our rangatahi and maybe wanted to talk first before the councillors not steal the thunder, but this way of thinking perhaps. So I don't want to put you on the spot, but I would love to hear.
Okay. Yeah, I think I agree with Lydia. I think, are you changing something that's working just to jump on the bandwagon of what other councils are doing? Like, I just see it as, like, has anyone in our community raised a concern with the way our voting system is now? Like, I think that's my question, is like, are people in our community saying we don't believe that our voting system's not working? Because I think then if they are raising those concerns, well then maybe we should be switching. But if everyone's happy with our voting system and if it's working for everyone and they're feeling confident in the candidates that they're voting for, then I don't feel like we should be changing our voting system. That's just my view.
Thanks for that.
Kia ora for uplifting our voices, by the way. I would agree with my fellow co-head, but I would also say, I remember reading in the report recently that the communities that seem to advantage are, I believe it was minorities and women. Correct me if anyone.
Yeah.
So I would say, is there a community that we believe in Selwyn needs uplifting, and is this something that we need to do at some point in the future, or need to do it all? Like, there's the two different issues of, do we need to do it at some point to sort of support these communities more? Because the more representation we can get of Selwyn, the better, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's probably reading the local government information. That was one of their main reasons for going down the STV path, was around that being a proportional representation. So, well, Shane's got his light on, but he's pointing at Ken. So,
You're poised, Ken.
okay, Shane, it's over to you while the contemplation goes on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the author of the report and staff for bringing this through, because we've asked for decision-making agendas, and here we have it here. And often it comes to these points in time to understand what a councillor is. I think there's definitely need for change. There's need for more engagement, and we've asked for that, and we don't currently get engagement. If it's anything, if there's one thing, I think a change brings more engagement, whether it's the right thing or whether it doesn't feel like it is the wrong thing. Most certainly we'll have more opportunity for engagement. I'm happy to support the recommendation, understanding that it will be taken to full council, and that's really where I would like to have the full conversation about it. I think STV, as you've explained, it gives a better understanding of, I'll just read what I've got here. It gives a better understanding of the vibe of the district by not wasting votes, and understanding like minority groups, given that there's a weighting to the ranking of elections, then once, if I'm understanding this correctly, once a candidate has reached the quota, then it moves to the next candidate down, ranking them from 1 to 2 or 1 to 3. I think you're absolutely right. We may have this face about face, but considering the regulations and timelines, I understand that's what has to happen first. And if we do reduce numbers of councillors, will it then be a useful method? But look, I'm all about change. I'm really interested in what where we're moving into the future, even if the report isn't uplifted by council, the future for local government. There are a number of councils that are using it, that have seen more engagement through the evidence here from having this type of election process. So I'm happy to support it. Thank you.
Thanks, Shane. Ken.
I'm sort of caught between a rock and a hard place, because I can see that there could be advantages, but my concern is that we have a widely diverse population out here, and we have a huge population close at hand, and then the other half, the rural population, is spread widely. And the first past the post one with our current ward structure gives fair representation across the district, I believe, as fair as you can get under the circumstances. If we do away with the ward structure, the logical thing is to go to STV. And if we go to STV, that could end up with disparities in representation.
Okay.
And that would be my only concern about that. So maintaining the ward structure would be my personal choice.
Okay.
But then I need to know what my constituents also think.
Okay. So, Murray, you got anything else you can add into the conversation there?
I suppose a comment I'd make, just listening around the table. And I think probably the timing that we're set by the legislation is unfortunate, that we do have to make a decision for September. And yet we're still working through the process of wards, number of elected members. So I think it's a bit unfortunate that we're in that sort of space, but it is what it is. We have to deal with that. That's probably all I could sort of, I can't add anything more to that. Unfortunately, I'd like to be able to say something that could take it forward, but it's just, unfortunately, yes, we're having to make a decision, or sorry, not we, but you're having to make a decision without the full knowledge of what you're going to then make later on.
I guess it's there comes a point where we as councillors have to make a decision, but we're not the full council sitting around the table, and maybe this is something that the full council should actually should be considering. It's come here because it was something that was on our mandate to look at. The timeline sort of thrown us a bit the curveball, where because of the timeline of the legislation, any consultation that we'd want to have with our community is stymied. So us as representatives of our community will be the ones that will have to make the original, the first part of the decision. That being the case, we are in a position where we need to make a decision today as to how we go forward. So I go back, is there any more conversations about that issue? Otherwise, we'll pull it forward.
Just that as the mover of option 3, I seek a seconder.
Yeah,
which is the recommended recommendation from staff.
With Councillor Epihar's permission, I'll run through the recommendations in order, and when we get to it, we'll get to that part there. Yep. So the first recommendation there is that we just receive the report. Can I have a mover on that first part of the recommendation? Thank you, Shane. Seconder on that. Thank you, Lydia. All those in favour say aye. Right, now the second part is obviously around the recommendation. The recommendation as it stands is to council to resolve and use single transferable vote in the 2025 to 2028 local government triennial elections. Shane has moved that. Is there a seconder for that motion?
Mr. Chair, would you mind if we adjourned for a minute so that the 2 youth representatives could have a conversation?
Of course. Yes, of course. We'll adjourn for 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll reconvene the meeting. So where we were, we had a mover for the second recommendation there. Shane has moved the second. Do we have a seconder for that? That we have a seconder. Thank you, Molly. Okay, I'm going to put any more conversation on that.
Actually, Mr. Chair, was the recommended, excuse me, the option was option 3C, the recommended option.
Oh, sorry, I'm just going with the recommendations on the up here. So just confirming, Shane, as it reads on the board there, that's you're moving that one there. The second.
I do.
And Molly's second, right. I open that up for debate. Any conversation, Molly?
I think we just wanted to iterate with that we think a move towards having the most use of our community's votes and representation of our community is important and it will probably happen eventually. But what we really want in this is for it to be a chance of full community engagement, not before voting, not after when there's an outroar because people didn't know what was happening, but in a lead up, a really, really sort of push on educating people what is single transferable vote and linking into the wider thing about representation and so on. Yeah.
And that's a really valid point. Just yep, thank you. Shane, are you using your right of a?
Have I used it? Apologies.
Not yet, but if I'll ask if anyone else has got anything to say, then I can come back to you last if you like.
I think I'd just like to touch back on the Future for Local Government review and their recommendation, which I feel is why we are moving towards the STV as the recommendation. I think that the voting in our district isn't what's broken. I think it's the actual faith in local government. And I think us making big changes to that isn't what is needed at the moment. If the Future for Local Government reform was picked up by Central and taken with two hands and run with, I think you would be jumping at every recommendation that is made. And I think it could be inevitable down the road that STV is probably what we are looking at. But I just think the timing's not quite right on it.
Thank you. So we've heard for the motion and against the motion. Your right of reply there, Shane, as the mover. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I remain unconvinced that this is the way to go, but I do believe that we need to take this recommendation through to our full council. And so I will vote for the recommendation.
Yeah. So Shane, anything as the mover of the motion?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And if I may have your indulgence, I'd just like to read a couple of paragraphs from the Local Government magazine, if that's okay. In determining optimum representation arrangements, councils need to know the communities of interest making up the area and the balance between those that are locally or geographically defined and those that are spread across the whole area. It may well be the case, for example, that the younger population is spread across the whole area and arrangements such as at-large or larger wards will achieve better representation for this frequently underrepresented and under-engaged group. The same applies in respect of Māori, in particular important where low numbers registered on the Māori electoral roll make up establishment of Māori ward or constituency. And practical, other communities that can benefit from a similar approach, that is the approach that I've supported, may be particular ethnic groups, the disabled, and also rural electors who often feel disadvantaged by the number of urban electors. So I stand by my recommendation because if we're seeking, and we've always said we're district councillors, and we are often, and we will get to that point, seeking more engagement, I think this may allow for that to happen, and is clearly the case in councils that have adopted that. Ruapehu, for instance, voter turnout increased from 51% in 2019 to 22 compared to 48%. So there was an increase, a notable increase. So I stand by. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. We'll we'll call for a vote on that. So the motion has been placed. All those for say aye. Raise your hand so I can see. All those against? Against the vote? Any abstentions? So we'll record one extension and one for and three for, one against, one abstention. Thank you, people. That was a great debate. No. Great debate. That will now go back to council, and Tim, when we goes to council, will we get a chance? Well, will I get a chance to speak to council as part of the report that you put through as to what the conversation that we've had here? Because I think that your point was absolutely well made, and I will make that point at our council meeting just the way that you made it. So thank you very much, Molly. Okay, let's move on. The next thing on the agenda is the basis of the election, the working group. Tim.
And I'll let Murray speak to this. It was a working group. I think that was first used back in the last review, just to get an idea of what works and what doesn't work around the country. Murray, through you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Yes, we undertook this probably a bit more of an informal basis last time. And this was one of the points raised from the action points as well, as to, what is that basis, whether it be wards at large or a combination of both. So this is the opportunity to look at that, to gain some research from other councils, what works well, what doesn't. In the last representation review, we spoke to a couple of councils and got some information from them on that. So this is about just getting a working group together to talk to some councils and come back to report back to this committee here, and then obviously look at a way forward as part of that.
Okay, thank you for that, Murray. So there's two recommendations there. There's a gap in the recommendation. Is anyone like to talk about that? Shane.
I'm happy to put my name forward.
So I'm so pleased you said that, because I was going to put your name forward. Lydia.
I'm happy to second Councillor Epiha.
Okay. Do we need to move it as a motion, or should we just slot his name in there?
I think we need to move that with the name in there.
Okay. All right. Okay. Any more conversation around that? Otherwise, we can talk about both of those together. We'll take the rest of the report as read. The two motions, points there, fun is to receive the report, and the second one is a recommendation that the chairperson, as it's on the screen there for you now. Thank you. Second for that. Thank you. Thank you, Ken. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Well done, Shane. Thank you. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the representation review at 2021 research. Tim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I'll let Murray speak to this. He was part of the 2021 process, and so was closer to this research. So over to you, Murray.
Thank you. This is just provided here in the report. Simply just so that we can refresh our thinking what actually was done last time. What were the thoughts of our community? And it sort of dovetails nicely into the next bit of work, just about what are we going to do now as a committee going forward in relation to pre-engagement.
Okay, thank you, Lydia.
I'm sorry.
I'm just struggling a bit to get my. Here we go. So the information, the recommendation here is that we receive the report. Is there any more we need to do as after we receive it?
I guess there might be some discussion around what the information looks like for this time. We've got this report, and we will need some further information. I would suggest some discussion on the way forward for that. I mean, one option would be to use this information to go back to research first and ask for a refresh of what they've done, and perhaps focus on the Commission's decision in terms of the communities of interest. And Murray, you are fairly close to that process and might have a view on that.
Yes, certainly the commission did pass some comment. They felt that we understood as a council very well the perceptual understanding of a community of interest, but not necessarily the functionality or the function side of the community of interest. And so one way of looking at that would be to get the work that's previously done refreshed, just so we know that's up to date, but then also just add in that additional work around the functional side of communities of interest. So that just covers off the concerns that the commission did raise. So that's another way you could work with that information.
So just to clarify, if we were to go down the path of refreshing the information, we would be effectively using the base information, the information as a base, saying just go and make comment, maybe go out to the community, refresh the information that you have based on the same premises that we have. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct. We'd follow the same logic, the same questions, the same argument that we put forward, except what we would do is ask the researchers to look at the problem statement that came out from the commission and then add in additional work from their perspective as to what would cover that off. Okay. So that should the commission be involved going forward, then we know that we've got a full understanding of that communities of interest. That would then also dovetail in with the work that staff would be looking at doing as well around pre-engagement. So you've covered it off from an internal staff perspective and also from an external research perspective as well. So we'd have a good understanding right across what that community of interest is, which would then lead to the scenario concept of where we go to from there. You know, what does it really mean once we do that?
Thank you. Shane, before I go to you, do you mind if I...
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
Molly McKenzie, you guys have read the information there. I'm really interested in your guys' perspective on the report that's which was in the attachment, and whether there's anything there that you thought that was missed from the information, or what were your thoughts on the way the information was gathered. I know that's putting you on the spot, and I do apologise. And the meeting's recorded, and it's going to be saved on YouTube forever. No, I'll tell you what, I'll go to Shane and then I'll come back to you. How does that sound, Shane?
Thank you. And I think both Murray and Tim, you've wrapped it up. That was then. We need now information to make any informed decisions. We need current information to do that. I'm interested in how the internal process will line up with the perhaps external reporting here and what similarities will draw out of it. Interesting to note that 61% of the residents at this point in time wanted to keep it the same number of wards, basically the status quo, even though there was a shift in boundaries. So it will be most certainly interesting, given the enormous growth that we've had in the district and the diversity of that growth. What are the current priorities, or where does representation factor into the new extension population? So I'm happy to move the report and look forward to the process.
Okay, right. Malcolm.
Yes, I support what you're saying there, Councillor Epihara, and I do think that we need to refresh this. As you say, we have grown to a hugely, 78% growth, 76% in 10 years. So I do think we need to look at this, and I think does this research? I read it earlier. That we talked about. Do people think there are enough wards? Too few? Well, do people think we should have wards that large? Because I think that would be a good question to have in there as well.
I guess, Murray, would it be in the scope to change the question?
Yes, it would be actually. And I'm just sort of thinking a wee bit through the process. And Tim, correct me if I got this wrong. What I'm sort of thinking really is that we would get, say, Research First to come to the next meeting. They can then say, look, this is what they went through last time, what we did, the questions, what it was about, and then can add in some additional comments and questions that you may want to get covered off as well, because that's a good point you do raise there. So just thinking aloud, that might be a way of doing that. That way we get sign off from this committee for that bit of work to be done.
And we perhaps get more involvement with the public.
Yeah.
So do we need a C up there that Research First be asked to?
Or even a B maybe, because there's only an A there.
There is Research First be asked to come to the committee to discuss future information gathering or something.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate. I don't know if we need a resolution to do that really. We could just bring a report that would, I think we're intending to provide some further information on the engagement and the information part of the process at the next meeting anyway, Murray. So I think we've heard what you've said. It's been minuted, so I don't know if a resolution is really needed.
Okay, take your advice. Thank you.
If I may quickly comment, certainly before we hit the streets with any sort of information like that, we want to make sure that as a committee that you're okay with that, and that you have the opportunity to make any changes or tweak from that. So,
Len.
It'd be interesting also to know how we're going to get community engagement, because the difficulty we have is getting the community interested. And, whether it's a process of using the Selwyn Times or Facebook or something like that, I don't know. But, getting the community to engage with us is going to be the problem.
I think earlier on, Tim alluded to the fact that our website, the newspaper and social media, we're seeing some really good thorough penetration with this, but it's a really good point, is that getting that message out there and the ability to get the message back. All right, so move on or nothing? No, thank you very much. Right, so the resolution is up there as it sits there to receive the report for information. So do I have a mover for that? Thank you, Malcolm. A seconder. Thank you, Ken. All those in favour say aye. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next point, which is for some reason my computer's not working properly, but that's your problem, my problem, not yours. This is the community pre-engagement strategy. Tim.
Thank you. That's a nice segue into this report in terms of that last discussion. So if I can ask Natasha to present this paper. Thank you.
Okay, so I feel like there's been a few comments around what I'm going to present to you today, and I think it's probably prudent to mention up front that there's a lot happening in the community at the moment in terms of engagement and consultation, and so the main thinking behind this particular strategy is to leverage what we're doing already, but also to create that captive audience that we already have. So let's move through this, and very briefly I'll outline what our approach is, what our objectives are, what the recommended methods are, and there's a few things I've heard today which we can obviously pivot on, suggested timelines that are also in line with other activity within the community and the timelines we need to adhere to here. And then a bit of a snapshot of how we wish to promote this particular topic in and around everything else that's happening. So first of all, our first objective is to build ongoing community advocacy. And that means that you talk to your community, we talk to the community almost every week about something different. And what we now know that we need are parts of the community that we don't currently engage with, but we need them to be advocates for us. And so through this process and through the initial recommended integration with our long-term plan, that is also an objective within that strategy. So we want to build groups within the community that we can engage with on an ongoing basis that are happy to provide us with their feedback, but also are advocates within their wider community. The next one is around engaging fair representation of the district. So for particularly those areas that have experienced significant growth, and something, Shane, that you raised earlier, particularly around those areas like your West Melton, your Rolleston, Lincoln, Springston, Prebbleton, Taitap. What do they see the future of their representation in the local community to be? And we have an abundant amount of research out there, and I think you would have been privy to the secondary research that we had done, and I'm happy to share that with those that weren't at that particular meeting around how people view and why people move here, some of the reasons that they see Selwyn as the best place to live, what their risks and what their, I suppose, thoughts are that moving into the future might potentially put those things that they love at risk. And also, I guess, the fact that we don't currently have great representation within our Māori community, our local migrant population, and that changing and evolution of the Selwyn district. The next objective is around leveraging other council-led activities. So we all talk about consultation fatigue, and there's a lot of it that exists at the moment, and there is that will exist towards the end of this year. So that is a big objective, to already work on what we have in market and to leverage an active community and engagement that we already have. And the last one is around applying more of an innovative approach to engagement, less traditional, and empowering our community to contribute to the outcome. And I think that's probably the most important one, getting feedback from the community before we actually go to them with a solution or a set of solutions. The next is around our approach. So we've obviously reviewed a whole lot of research and the research that was done in 2021. We wish to integrate what we're doing for representation review into the current long-term plan re-engagement schedule. The approach is also to present a targeted plan, so a targeted plan for representation review that is separated from the long-term plan pre-engagement. But something that is worth considering, and obviously I've spoken to it earlier, is two parts. So within September through to November, there are 3 consultations happening all at once. One is long-term plan, one is representation review, the other is the local alcohol policy review, amongst a few other activity within the local council at that time around alcohol. And then also the roading and speed management plan. So all are very important subject matters and potentially will carry a risk of moving and shifting the attitude and the positive attitude towards what we're trying to determine with representation review. So that is an important consideration. Secondly is around awareness and competing messages. And I think a lot of people don't know what representation review means. They don't know what the word ward or the term ward means. And we're looking at delving deeper into that for our long-term plan pre-engagement. So moving on to proposed methods. So first of all, I spoke to integrating with the long-term plan. And as you'll know, long-term plan pre-engagement starts today and concludes mid-September. So we are moving through a new process of conducting pre-engagement with our community, one through the charrette process, which is much like a focus group. And I suppose that the purpose, just to backtrack, the purpose really is to reach this captive audience that we have already recruited for this process. And the purpose is to obviously introduce the topic of representation review into LTP. And how we'll be doing that is with the charrettes. The councillors that are here hopefully remember their workshop last week, just around quick fire questions, which was centred on the topic of representation. Questions such as, who do you identify with in your local community? Where do you live in your local community? Do you go to your council first or your councillor first? Those sorts of questions that help us to determine what people think and how people integrate within their community. Secondly, we have Huiana, which these are more focused on our migrant communities. So we are taking a similar approach with charrette, but taking it to the community. So we currently have the refugee community group who meet every Sunday, who are very engaged with us and want to be ongoing in terms of engagement. So we are taking questions. They have pre-read what those questions are, and they're preparing some answers for us as well, and some questions back to us. We also have the Māori student group at Lincoln University who have put their hand up to be part of a huiana. We have another student group in Southbridge to really integrate that youth voice. And we also have a community group in Darfield for Pacifica, which we're getting great engagement with those communities, which is a really good result. So with the huiana, we'll obviously be integrating the representation review in a way that isn't as direct as having an individual representation review, huiana or charrette, but we're doing it in a way that allows them to drive the outcome. So getting information from them without asking direct questions. Lastly is our mixed mode surveying. So that basically means a combination of phone surveys, which were carried out in 2021 for the representation review, intercept surveys, which will be held at places of mass gathering across the district. So, for example, the Culture Fest on the 10th of September is one of those locations. And then also online surveys, so to really reach a younger demographic, but also more widespread than targeted. That online survey has not been written yet, so we can dictate or determine if there are gaps in our research from the charrette and huiana process. We have the ability to be iterative along this whole process and feedback what is missing and where we want more information. And then the last area of LTP is around a pilot program for gamification in the Rolleston district. So that is a scavenger hunt whereby people answer a series of questions and there are clues along the way to engage them a little bit more innovatively and creatively. So we also plan to integrate this topic into that process, which will hopefully give us a little bit more information as to where people identify within their local community. I suppose the most important thing to note here is that this is obviously part of the long-term plan process, so it's not specific to representation review. Having said that, the outcome from this pre-engagement process will be used across council, and obviously the research will be widespread and positive, hopefully. In terms of a more targeted approach for representation review, so what I wanted to kind of represent here is more the balance between having community advocacy, but also the balance of maintaining and ensuring that we don't get consultation fatigue. So really the recommended approach here is to run a more targeted engagement process. So rather than having a widespread online survey that is sent to as many people as possible, we identify those communities that we wish to speak to and the gaps that we may have, and get targeted feedback, but also build on educating the public about what representation review actually means, what the term ward means, and what we actually what we mean by all of this, and what I suppose the role of council is in this process. So I know, Molly, you mentioned earlier around education. I think that's probably a big gap for us to build, and the proposal is that we start there and then we work back with the feedback that we've garnered from the LTP process. As I mentioned earlier, there is a lot of consultation fatigue, so it is about reaching the right people at the right time, and whether or not we start with a more of an educational approach and then we move to targeted feedback. Initially, in this particular presentation, I had charrette and also online survey as a proposed method. From the LTP integration, I think we'll get what we need, and also what we want to make sure we don't get is information that is irrelevant to this process. So given we already have quite a lot of research at hand, we probably need to be a bit more iterative along the process and find out what we actually need to know. One thing that Research First and speaking to Research First, so they are a partner in this process. So they already know what our purpose and what our objectives are for representation review, is that they can adapt to the audience that they're speaking to. So we can ask more questions around how people view their ward and their community, where they shop, where they work, etc., depending on those individuals, I suppose, interest in that area. In terms of how we promote this, so we obviously have council-owned assets. We spoke to our website earlier. We spoke to our social media channels. What I think will work best in this process is to run more of an above-the-line media campaign where we educate the population and audience on what representation review actually means, but we also run a membership drive to sign up to our membership database so that we can engage with those people in a more targeted way. The research shows, and the research and results from 2021 show that there were only 300 people that answered an online survey, and that online survey was sent to an open audience across our social media channels. So I think the most important thing here to do is to run a membership drive to actually get people's attention first, grab a captive audience, and then speak to them at more targeted level. I suppose next steps here is to talk through the proposed methods for targeting the community. Are we at a point where we can present scenarios to our community and get their feedback? Or are we wanting, I suppose, to approach it from a more open and honest conversation level? So that's the proposed methods, but obviously we can pivot once we have some results.
That's a great proposal, and I see the timeline in the report that you wrote is a really good summary of the timeline of the grid that you just gave as well. Any questions, team?
Well, I think Natasha posed a question at the end of it, did she not?
Which was the
Are we going to give a combined approach, or are we going to be more open?
So I think it's worth noting that obviously the LTP process, pre-engagement, has already started. And like I said earlier, we can feedback those results on an ongoing basis just to see where there are gaps in information that we might need to elaborate further on. Given there's a lot happening in October across consultation period with LAP, with speed management plan, those two topics may put at risk any positive results that we get from having open discussions through charrette method, through online surveys with our community on a topic that they probably need further education on. So this last proposed and targeted approach is to either present some scenarios direct to the community on what we propose for representation in terms of wards, councils, etc., but then also run more of an education program around what it actually means and the benefit to the individual audience.
Thank you. So that's great. Is our questions? We go. Yeah. Okay.
Do you know what age range the Southbridge youth group that you're
Yes,
talking to
it is. Oh, sorry.
No, yeah, that's my question.
It's 16 to 24.
Cool.
Yeah.
Will you be exploring other youth groups?
Mhm.
Cool. And are you adjusting your questions and your consultations to be youth focused?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. With a lot of the Huiana, so those groups have already read through what we want to achieve and the objectives, and they've put forward their own questions that we can talk through at the Huiana. So they are very different to the charrette questions that we're asking. Yeah.
Thanks, Mackenzie. Shane.
Oh,
Sorry.
well,
Yes. Sorry. Molly. Sorry about that.
Mine isn't so much a question so much as a point of comparison. You mentioned that education around civics is a big thing and sort of knowing and engaging, and I think you mentioned gamifying at one point to get further
Yes.
interaction. Selwyn Youth Council actually has an ongoing project around civics education, because we've noticed it's a big thing in youth. And that's a game, as in you're the mayor of Selwyn going around on tasks. So I don't know if that has any potential links or help for you, but I thought I'd draw the comparison of
Yes.
recurring themes.
Yes, and I'm aware of that, which is something that we looked at in terms of how we position the app that we're doing. So basically, the gamification is a way of talking about the topic without talking about the topic, and using imagery and less copy to actually get people engaged. So what you're doing probably delves deeper into more of an education approach. This will be a series of questions about what the individual wants to see as part of the future of Selwyn.
Thanks, Molly. Shane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Sasha, for your report. I like the pictures. It makes it a lot easier to quickly, in the engagement timeline here.
Yes.
I've just put that away. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. I think it makes it more accessible, and accessible being the key word for engagement. If it's too complicated, we lose attention. Well, I'll speak for myself.
Yeah.
There's potentially lose engagement. Thank you very much for bringing up the gamification, because my question revolves around integration of engagement, and can we not do that because it is governed by legislation? So that's one question. While the Huiana has specific groups that we're encouraging, are all ethnicities encouraged to come along and participate? Yes, gamification, I think that's great. Making the research accessible after it's been produced. Sorry, I lost my train of thought here. Appropriateness of councillors attending. Will the engagement process or the engagement times be accessible for all councillors to attend, and is that appropriate? And the questions for the updated report, refer to one back, they're a little bit bland. They do focus on identity. Well, no, identity is good, but how do they reflect the pillars of council: health, culture, environment, and economy? And maybe I've missed a part of that, but I think as council laws responsible for the 4 pillars of local government, it's important that we have that information or a direction of what the community expects or needs or feels that they require. And just question around seniors as well, and how are we engaging our rangatira of the district, and what questions we'll be asking them, because the question that usually comes back to me is that they would like to live and they would like to stay and age in place in the rural areas. Thank you.
So just, I suppose, taking a step back with the LTP, the Huiana, we've chosen to do 5 of those for this particular project, and we could do more, and I think it's the first time we've ever done them, so it is a new way of us engaging, and I think that it will be, in my assumption, it will be something that we'll continue to do quite frequently. But back to the first objective around building customer advocacy, that is where we want to do that within those communities. And we've already had that feedback to say that, yes, we want to engage with you more, and you are more than welcome to come to our community group meetings, etc. So the refugee community group has quite a diverse diversity of ethnicities, and they meet every Sunday, and I think they are very open to us attending those. But for this purpose, we want to be able to let them lead the discussion. So whilst we have an idea of the questions we're asking, they will also lead the process in terms of what's important to them. In terms of the older demographic, so with the mixed mode surveying, the phone surveys sort of identify, and in the past what we've done, I've identified the older population as being more open to that method. And then just around local mana whenua as well, working with my colleague Paul Medier on speaking with those communities as well, in a less formal way. And then the gamification. So it's a pilot too. So I think that's just another trial that we're looking at doing, and hopefully we get some good results, and we can work more into the future of doing more of that. Yeah.
So Lydia looks at that's push. I'll say something first. The combined approach, obviously, and take into account the consultation fatigue and everything. It sounds like from what we're hearing around the room, that's the way that. My direct question to that is, one of the things that this group needs to specifically consider is the communities of interest, and our desire to understand that before we get our data in, our numeric data in November. The better we have a better understanding of that, the better we can make the decision once we've got the numerical data.
Yes,
So, yeah.
correct.
Lydia, did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, it's sort of along the lines of what you've just said, Phil. And I wanted to thank Natasha for the amazing options that you bring to us now with the engagement. And I think it'll work. I'm excited to see this out in the community.
Thank you.
And we are right. It is consultation fatigue. It is everything. And we know it ourselves. So yeah, I definitely support the integration of this into what we're already doing. And it's almost, two birds, one stone. But yeah, that's right. The most important thing for us is to actually figure out our communities of interest at the moment. And I don't know if we can actually go out and give hypothetical situations of what our wards or councillors at large or whatever actually looks like at the moment.
Well, not without that information anyway. To
that's
answer your
feedback.
question around that, it's all very hypothetical.
It is. And I think that the second point there around education is probably the most important one that we can drive. The purpose of this whole process, why it's important to the individual, and how the individual can actually drive a better outcome for the future of Selwyn. So we propose to do that through this promotional plan that looks at both using our own assets, so people that already come to those facilities, come to our website, visit our social channels, which is a small part of the community, and then running more targeted paid media to really reach those audiences that we don't currently have following Selwyn.
My apologies. Thank you. Think of that. Now, before after we've got the recommendations there, that that we accept the report, provide the feedback, and that we agree the strategy and the timeline. So, is there any more questions before we put that to a vote? Okay, someone wants to move those through recommendations. Thank you. I was going to say Sharon, but it's not. It's Lydia and Molly. Thank you. Any more discussion around that? All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Okay. Thank you very much for that awesome report. We look forward to moving forward now. That concludes the meeting. So I'm going to speak slowly and hopefully on the
Mr. Chair. Sorry, Mr. Chair, if I may, just referring, I have one more question. Sorry to drag this on. Just in regards to the tab 7 choosing an electoral system, and I should have spoken up at the time. I wonder if consideration can be given as the seconder of the motion that our youth representatives are actually part of, with speaking rights, the full council meeting, to be a part of that, because the part of as the seconder. I think consideration should be given.
I think that this group has made the consideration. Now, this group as a whole will go back to that bit all on saying that if the people would like to be there, if you'd like to be there, Molly, I would love to have you there. It's at our council meeting. But then that's up to that chair of that meeting, as to whether or not they have speaking rights.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I thank our youth members for the recommendation, the seconding of the recommendation. It really shows your wisdom. Kia ora.
Anything more before we close the meeting off? We'll finish off with our karakia then. Unihia, tapo, kia watia, ai, kua watia. Thank you, everybody. That concludes the meeting.